Cancel culture finally comes for Shakespeare. It's no surprise that dopey educrats who can't read Shakespeare without Cliff Notes rush to debarred the curriculum. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and Lois. This is the Dr. Dukas Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start in the classroom where English teachers, yes, people who supposedly appreciate the written word, are canceling William Shakespeare because he's obviously a toxic white male that happens to be or not to be at the root of all our woke problems. And this, as a Shakespeare professor myself, when I became a university professor all those years ago, and if I were 25 years younger, I would not do it. I would not recommend it to anybody. I could see it even back in the late 90s, the early 90s. I could see where this was going. Didn't think it would happen as fast as it happened. I figured certainly by the time my career was over, there wouldn't be classes and writers like Shakespeare anymore, and that's rapidly now coming down the pike. And the argument that they're giving that Shakespeare is somehow misogynistic is nonsense. Shakespeare, the associating Shakespeare with the characters in his plays is childish. So you've got, in a play like Merchant of Venice, you've got the Jew Shylock, right, who was actually one of the first relatively sympathetic presentations of a Jewish person in the history of Western literature. Shylock is a complicated man. He's not a stereotype. That's progress in Shakespeare's day. We have one of his great tragedies, Othello, features an African character for the first time, really in serious Western literature. And Othello is a hero. He's a very heroic figure. That's progress in the 16th century. But to the woke scolds of the day, there is no progress. Shakespeare didn't believe what we believe, and because he's white, he's got to go. And this is what education has come to in America today.
And so we've been talking about this for years now. There have been little pockets of the nation and across the world, really, who have tried to cancel Shakespeare in their classes. And it's another example of how much people hate, I guess, white authors from a period of time other than today who are not woke. And if they're not woke, they're going to go broke. But for Bill Shakespeare, the New York Post actually reported that it was the English literature teachers told the school library journal that they would no longer be teaching plays such as Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, all the ones. Basically, Romeo and Juliet's the only one that you had to read in high school. And maybe if you took an advanced literature course, you would do Hamlet and Macbeth. But they're no longer even going to teach even one of his plays because they're all bad. And so instead, what these teachers are saying they're going to do is make room for modern, diverse, and inclusive voices. Because apparently, William Shakespeare is not any of those things at all.
Well, and I would argue that Shakespeare is more than woke. I mean, what does woke mean? So apparently the impression we're supposed to have is that when you're woke, you're not asleep. So we've been asleep all these years to racism, even though it's all we've ever talked about since I was a little kid. All I ever learned in school from historical perspectives about America is slavery. So now we're awake, right? But just being woke doesn't mean you understand anything. I think Shakespeare is better than woke. He is aware. He is aware of difference. He is aware of differences in culture. He is aware of the ways that people see things differently. In fact, he's better than woke. He's aware. And so 400 years ago, when he's giving you an African hero, where 400 years ago he's giving you a balanced portrait of a Jewish protagonist, 400 years later, when Shakespeare is questioning the behavior of tyrants, when 400 years later, Shakespeare is giving you rounded flesh and blood characters like Cleopatra, like Portia, like Lady Macbeth, women with agency before, according to the left, they ever had any. It's just not good enough now. And that shows you what you're really dealing with here. You're not dealing with sensitive readers who have progressive values, who want to make the world a safer, friendlier place. What you're dealing with is communist apparatchiks who want to erase Western culture because the real message of Western culture, when you sit down and study it, is ever-growing liberty, ever-growing freedom, up until the age of atheism, where things like fascism and Nazism and communism then took over. We have to eradicate Shakespeare, not because he's not woke enough, but because he's too awake. to the reality that race and gender and sex, even in his own plays, is subordinated to character, to agency, to impulse, to free will, and to the serving of God. That's his major crime.
Incorrect. It's all because the not woke Shakespeare in his plays wrote about sleep. Sleep, perchance to dream. There's the rub.
Well, I will say that we've got to be proud of Katie there. I actually met Katie in a Shakespeare class, right? So I was teaching Shakespeare. She was a student in the Shakespeare class. She was a little bit older and tons wiser than the brainwashed little morons who sat next to her. So we snagged her for the show. Glad to do it. But she was watching her reaction to hearing Shakespeare taught from Shakespeare's perspective was amusing. She always sat in the back row with kind of a smirk, or she would stifle a giggle when everybody else was confused. So right away I knew, well, hey, this may be the last student I ever have who understands Shakespeare and could even read him. And since the 6 years or so since that happened, it's true. My kids' ability to even read things like Shakespeare has been undercut. We're bringing kids to college whose reading level is about the 9th grade. Trying to teach Shakespeare all these years to kids who can barely read has been difficult. I guess if that's the silver lining of the canceling of Shakespeare, I won't have to worry about teaching illiterates how to read one of the greatest writers in history. It's frustrating anyway.
But specifically to these professors who are supposed to be like Dr. Duke teaching Shakespeare, but instead, why do that when we can just talk about wokeness? Ayanna Thompson is an English professor at Arizona State University, and she says that Shakespeare was a tool used to civilize black and brown people in England's empire. Jeffrey Austin, who leads the English literature department at Michigan High School, said that teachers needed to challenge the whiteness that leads to claims that Shakespeare's works are universal. And if you've listened to the past couple minutes here from Dr. Duke, you know that these people are full of, well, insert a Shakespeare term here.
Let's say just they're full of ideology. Let's be kind to them, right? Because that's all they've got. They don't have intellectual ability. They're not critical thinkers. These people probably couldn't sit down for all of their education degrees and their PhDs in education, which demonstrate nothing in terms of knowledge. It's the biggest joke in any university is a master's degree in education or a PhD in education. It is a complete joke. You'd almost be better off with a high school diploma from a real school than to have a PhD in education from a major university.
No? Because you're the best doctor of all the doctors in all the land, Dr. Jill Biden.
Well, that's right, Jill. I mean, she's singular Dr. Jill. And don't you call her Mrs. Jill.
Dr. Jill.
She's Dr. Jill.
Well, of course, if you're going to kick out Shakespeare, why not kick out the rest of his homies? That's what those Brits are doing over in the England land, where all these homies came from. The University of Leicester announced back in January they're going to remove Chaucer. Ever heard of Chaucer? He wrote this fine little tale called The Canterbury Tales. It's a thick book. I know you probably used it as a doorstop, if anything. But The Canterbury Tales must go. Also, Beowulf. Maybe you've heard of Beowulf. It's an Anglo-Saxon epic poem. It's old English type things, hard to read. So you probably also didn't look at that either. So really, Shakespeare you should keep just for the sake of he's the best English to read, the easiest of the Englishes to read. But anyway, we need to get rid of that because we need sexuality, diversity, race, ethnicity. That needs to be in. Old white dudes, get out of here.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, and it's logical, right? If you believe that whiteness is the problem, it's a racist statement. If you believe that whiteness is responsible for all the evils in the world, and that anybody who happens to have white skin, by definition, is guilty of all the crimes of white people everywhere, not only are you scapegoating, not only are you racially profiling, not only are you making sweeping stereotypical generalizations about people, all things that we used to be told were racist when you did them against blacks or Hispanics. Now you do it now with white people. And that means white people going back through history. And you see the bigotry of this. The idea that Geoffrey Chaucer and Soren Kierkegaard and Aristotle and Alexander the Great and General Patton and Dr. Duke Pesta, the idea that we're all just white men. We're all the same. Same culture, same attitude, same worldview, same toxic masculinity. That's perhaps the single greatest leveling, racist leveling, really in the history of the world, done by people who claim to fight racism and bigotry and stereotyping and racial profiling. It shows you really how intellectually bankrupt they are. But look, you got rid of Shakespeare. Everybody's fair game now. There's nobody bigger. And if you can get rid of Shakespeare and pat yourself on the back because you sacrificed Shakespeare for Sandra Cisneros, as one high school teacher said, I took out Shakespeare and I inserted Sandra Cisneros. Ever heard of her? Probably not. But she's Hispanic. That's her claim to fame. So if you can get rid of Shakespeare, get rid of all of them. There's nobody left except the Bible. And as somebody I was reading, I was on The Blaze or something, somebody was predicting this week, the next thing they're going to come for is biblical characters. And that's right. Now that you got rid of Shakespeare, literature's done, art's done, the next thing you're going to see is start with the Old Testament, all right? The Old Testament. David's got to go because of what he did to Bathsheba. Can't talk about him. You've got Moses now, who killed an Egyptian and buried him in the sand. He's got to go now, right? And you can go down the list of Old Testament literature, and they all got to go. God's got to go because he didn't immediately outlaw slavery. God's got to go because he used his power disparity to banish Eve from the Garden of Eden just for eating a piece of fruit.
So everyone knows, Fox News host Bill Hemmer was the one who predicted
Thank you.
that.
That was Bill Hemmer said that.
So there is, I don't know if you want to call it good news or just too little too late kind of news. There are some academics who are saying this is complete BS. And so they are either fighting it or resigning their positions. We have at least 2 academics who are resigning from Leicester University of Leicester in protest of what's happening. We also have Professor Isabel Armstrong, who is a fellow of British Academy, who returned her honorary doctorate in protest at the egregious attack on the integrity of English at Leicester and the attempt to eradicate 1,000+ years of language and literature from the curriculum.
But here's the problem.
Yes.
Who's retiring? Who's protesting? Yeah. Medieval literature people.
Yeah.
Chaucer's a medieval writer. The Canterbury Tales is a medieval text. And so who's getting angry? Tenured professors whose job it is to teach medieval literature. Do you understand why nobody cares? They came for George Washington, and the medievalists said nothing. They came for Thomas Jefferson, and the medievalists said nothing. They came for Shakespeare, and the medievalists said nothing. Now they've come for Chaucer, and the medievalists whine, tough noogies, buddy. You couldn't help anybody else. You couldn't take a stand way before when this started. Why should anybody take a stand for you? You're as good as canceled, professors of medieval literature. Better get your start. Either start looking for jobs at Lowe's and Home Depot, right, and selling shutters and Venetian blinds, or maybe get yourself one more certificate in social justice. So you could, instead of teaching medieval lit, you could teach Sandra Cisneros.
That's an option. We do have a letter from 18 of those medieval studies fellows at the British Academy, and it was organized by Oxford University professor Vincent Gillespie, who decried the proposed decolonization as having caused international dismay. According to the letter that they sent, the 14th century, at the boundary of modernity, while still concretely medieval, is one of the most remarkable periods in all of literature. This is them touting up their own job. My job's more important than yours. There's arguments for that, though. How can anyone seriously claim that an English degree wouldn't be materially impoverished by excluding so much literature?
And that's the point. We won't have English degrees in the future. Are you too stupid to realize this? You're actually arguing that what's an English diploma degree? What's a degree in English if you don't have Chaucer? Exactly the point. You're getting rid of all the great writers, so you no longer have an English department. It's going to be, I've said this many times in the Dr. Duke Show, and I'm going to say it again. What's going to happen in universities is what we know today as the humanities. Those courses and topics like history, philosophy, art history, English, that literally provided morality, stability, and cultural knowledge to our kids are going to be eradicated. And what you're going to have instead is the entire humanities programs are going to meld into one large continent, one great Pangea of social justice. And why would you, if what the humanities is going to become is radical left-wing social justice theory across the board, why go back 100 years? Why go back 500 years? Do it with books today and ignore everything else about our culture. That's the future of your American universities within the next 20 years.
Well, we know Disney is so woke. Disney, my childhood. I can sing you many a songs. Not well, but I could sing them. And now I could sing you all of the cries from my child who will no longer be able to watch the Disney because they're blocking certain things because, you know, they're racist. Disney has admitted, I guess, as much that some of their things are racist. 4 of their classics are being censored on the Disney Plus app for kids under 7 because of negative depictions and or mistreatment of people or cultures. And so specifically, the 4 are Dumbo, yes, the elephant, Peter Pan, Swiss Family Robinson, and the Aristocrats. They are not available to your youngins unless they sit through a 12-second content that can't be skipped.
And as we will see in the next story, it's also the Muppets, who have been owned by Disney, who also have now, the Muppet Show has trigger warnings. So what does this say? This is the same Disney, right? What's the name of the actress that was just fired from The Mandalorian?
Gina Carano.
Yeah, Gina Carano, right? So and what was she fired for, Katie? What horrible sin did she say? She actually...
Having a brain.
Yeah, she actually basically challenged cancel culture. And for that, right, she didn't attack anybody's culture. She didn't undermine anybody racially. She didn't use offensive, harsh words like the N-word at some point to get... No, they canceled her, Disney, simply because she dared to challenge the cancel culture itself. These same Nazis are now putting warning signs on things like, oh, I don't know, The Muppet Show, but things like Big Mouth or shows like that Disney has done, which have, I know it's not a Disney show, so and I know Big Mouth is not a Disney show, but they have their own shows like that are pushing masturbation, that are pushing homosexual relationships, that are pushing transgender to 6 and 7-year-olds. There's not a single adult content warning on any of those shows. So as long as you're a progressive, they'll teach your kids anything. As long as you're not a progressive, they're going to hashtag erase everything, or at least make it much harder for your kids to watch it.
So for the Disney specific of the 4 classic videos, the disclaimer includes directing viewers to the Disney site that's called Stories Matter. According to Disney, as part of our ongoing commitment to diversity and inclusion, we are in the process of reviewing our library and adding advisories to content that includes negative depictions or mistreatment of people or cultures. We can't change the past, but we can acknowledge it. Learn from it and move forward together to create a tomorrow that today can only dream of.
Hey, just out of curiosity, Disney, is it not possible? Don't you need to put a warning on Star Wars? Because don't the rebels actually mistreat the Empire? I mean, if I'm somebody who came from the Empire, I mean, if my people are the Empire, our Death Star was destroyed. Where's the trigger warning about the abuse of cultures?
Are you saying you're Darth Vader?
Luke.
After Disney put out the four classic movies, then they're like, whoa, Muppet Show. We got to take you down, Swedish chef. Because they had to come out and say a disclaimer of offensive content. Muppets. All felt. Here's what the disclaimer says. This program includes negative depictions and or mistreatment of people or cultures. These stereotypes were wrong then and are wrong now. Let that one sink in. Rather than remove this content, we want to acknowledge its harmful impact, learn from it, and spark conversation to create a more inclusive future together. See how Disney does this? Man, do they gobbledygook word speak, like just twist it because, well, we're acknowledging it, so now you can't cancel us.
And let's be clear. A lot of people want to buy The Muppet Show. And so if they just cancel it, notice what Disney says. We would cancel this, but we want to provoke dialogue. No, you don't.
Money, money,
you want
money.
money, right? So you want to sell the Muppet Show to all the racists who like it. You just want to wag your finger and make it seem like you're doing it because you're tolerant and broad-minded, not because you're just in it for the money. And, you mentioned the Swedish chef. I think you're probably right.
Chef.
I mean, the Swedish chef, imagine him, right, prancing around going, wingy, boingy, doingy, doingy. So, and can't you see a bunch of woke scolds at Disney, right, sitting there saying, my goodness. And they're probably so illiterate and ignorant that one of them says, hey, wait a minute. That's not really Swedish, is it? Somebody, quick, get a dictionary. Somebody, quick, call a Swedish person. Somebody go to the local university and talk to a Swedish professor. Is this actually Swedish that they're speaking?
They're so
we don't
offended.
know. And guess what? In a future staff room, 3 months later, when somebody finally comes back with the answer, that's not Swedish. This is caricature. This is parody. This is the mocking of a culture.
It's that special time for some real education. And we're back yet again as we talk about the Netherlandish painter Jan van Eyck. And today on Instant Classic, we're going to consider the Annunciation from the Ghent altarpiece.
Van Eyck Week, man. I mean, how cool is that? You got a week for everything. You got a week for balloon week, sailing balloons. You got kite week. Now you got on the Dr. Duke Show Van Eyck Week. And how cool is that to say, hey, around the water cooler, did you catch Van Eyck Week on the Dr. Duke Show? You never knew Netherlandish painting from the 15th century could just be so badass. And so today we're looking at, speaking of badass, we're looking at the Ghent altarpiece and take a look at this one aspect of this magisterial work of art. Yesterday on the Dr. Duke Show, we actually gave you an overview of the Ghent altarpiece. So please find that at the Dr. Duke Show archive for Instant Classics. This is one aspect of the painting. This is the beautiful Annunciation from the Ghent altarpiece. And what a piece of outstanding artistry. You have the angel Gabriel on the left, and you have the Mother of God, Mary, on the right. You can see how the angel has already made his Annunciation. You can see how the Holy Spirit in the shape of a dove is descending on the head of the Mother of God, whereas Gabriel strikes a pose of solicitation to the Mother. The Mother of God has crossed her hands across her heart, right, as the Holy Spirit descends upon her. But look at the artistry. Look at the creation of depth that Van Eyck is a master of. These are oil paints. And in a culture where Annunciation scenes, we actually saw an earlier Annunciation from Van Eyck on Monday's show, 4 days ago. So again, go back to the Dr. Duke archives and you will see the Annunciation show from Van Eyck. And you can see how colorful the clothing of Mary, how colorful the clothing of the angel Gabriel is. Here, he mutes them. He almost blanches them out. Go to the next picture, a little bit closer up, Mike. Get a sense of how resplendent that angel is. The face is perfect. The pose is perfect. He holds in his hand a calla lily, one of the major symbols of the purity of the Virgin Mother of God. Even the wings here are the only things really in the picture that have serious color to them, and the colors are very muted. Now, if you go over and look at the Mother of God there, this is really a masterpiece. I mean, you can almost see the way the eyes fall back in her head. She goes into a trance, almost a trance there, almost a metaphysical connection that takes place here. Well, almost it is a metaphysical connection where literally the power of the Lord overpowers Mary. And you can see what she says in the writing. And what she says is, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, ecce ancille domine." But notice how clever Van Eyck is. He writes it upside down because God's the one who's got to hear it, right? So it's written ecce ancille domine. Behold, the handmaid of the Lord. It's just upside down so that God can see it. We will have our final episode on Van Eyck tomorrow, and that will complete Van Eyck Week.
All right, if you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support our Patriot Club, and we're going to send you, as a little token of our appreciation, our signature tumbler, so you can stay hydrated. Visit patriotclub.us to sign up That's patriotclub.us. And just a quick reminder to please download our brand new Freedom Project Media app. All you have to do is simply search for Freedom Project on your smart device. And please, once you download it, make sure you allow for notifications.
App up, people. App up. And that's going to do it for this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay apt, my friends.